So this is my out of the theater response to Superman. Now, I am a James Gunn fan. I figure anybody that can make me enjoy a movie with a talking raccoon, and mind you, I hated the Guardians in comic book form. Um, you already got my attention, straight out. You got my attention. And I came to appreciate all three of those movies. I actually did enjoy all three of the Guardian flicks. I enjoyed Creature Commandos. I even watched Peacemaker, and I enjoyed that. So I like James Gunn. So my son and I went to go see this today. We went and caught the 2:00 showing, which I want to say might have been the very first showing that it had at my little movie theater here in Fresno. So caught the earliest flick I could, checked it out. A few things. All right, so let me get the things out of the way that I enjoyed. I liked the suit. I liked the suit, although I did think the fabric was too thick for as much body work as Corn Sweat put in to get that muscular. The fabric was too thick, and I thought the shorts were a little too big, but I liked the shorts. I'm a classic Superman guy. And I think it's pretty straightforward. If you know anything about me, you know I'm Gen X. So I'm going to always defer to Christopher Reeve. That just is what it is. Now, my son and I had a very interesting conversation about this because he was saying that Superman is boring. He's a video gamer. I'm more into movies and animated stuff, but he likes video games. And he was just saying for his generation, Superman is just boring. And so he looked at it as James Gunn was forced to reintroduce Superman to a new generation, and he had to find something compelling and interesting in doing so. To kind of get another generation involved. And I understand, and I agree actually with that analysis. I think that is the challenge that Gunn faced. He's trying to find a new, younger demographic. But again, I'm a Christopher Reeve guy, so for me, I like my Superman refined, intelligent, strategic, but more than anything, emotionally mature. And I think what Gunn did is what he tends to do. Most of his characters have the emotional development of teenagers, no matter what their age, for the most part. They have the emotional maturity of a teenager. And I think he kind of regresses everybody to that if he can do it. On a racial scale and on a cultural scale, he reminds me of Rob Zombie in the sense that he kind of, tends to lean more toward, what did my son call it? Bumpkin kind of thing. I've heard others refer to it as white trash, but his cultural references tend to be lower class whites, lower class whiteness, and you see that somewhat in the depiction of the Kents. It's not quite the depiction that I'm used to, but let's dive into it. So as far as the things that I liked, like I said, I liked the suit. I thought there could have been some alterations made. I liked the first live appearance of Mr. Terrific. Now, I'm not a great Mr. Terrific fan, but I thought from what I've read over the years, I'm a 45-year comic book collector, I thought he did a good job in terms of writing the character. The only problem now let me say this, he wasn't a sidekick, which I appreciate. So Gunn seems to be more aware than Kevin Feige or the MCU, because for the most part, most of their black men are outside of Black Panther are basically glorified sidekicks in one way, shape, or form. Now that's a blanket statement. I'm not going into every detail possible, but I will say for the most part, I tend to see that with their representation of black men. With the DCU and its first introduction of a black male character. Now they've had black female characters, particularly on they did it with Suicide Squad. They did it with Peacemaker. You had what's her name? She kind of runs the metahuman approach to things in the DCU. The black woman character, goddamn, how am I blanking on her name right now? Anyway, shit, it's pretty straightforward, but I always forget her. It's her and her daughter that kind of run things. But anyway, so we've seen black women in there, but we haven't seen too many black men. So this is the first. Amanda Waller, that's what I'm thinking of. Amanda Waller and her daughter are shown in Suicide Squad, and then you kind of see them come back in Creature Commandos, particularly Waller herself. So you kind of get that, and of course you had Idris Elba, in that Suicide Squad, the second one I'm referring to, not the first. So you did have at least that, but in this, Mr. Terrific is actually pretty good. He doesn't really kowtow to white characters. He's not a sidekick. He's not deferential to women, particularly white women. He has no problem kind of checking anybody he needs to check. He's often, the smartest guy in the room, or one of. So far he's been kind of the smartest guy in the room. So they didn't really punk him, and they didn't really kind of push down his capabilities. He didn't get kind of weakened in that way, and I appreciated that. I'm not a huge Mr. Terrific fan as a character. I mean, he's okay, but he's not one that I get excited about, but I thought they represented him well. The only problem with these kind of characters is they don't feel comfortable dealing with black male sexuality. So, a lot of these characters don't ever end up having girlfriends. Like, I'm thinking of Black Captain America, for example, who was a sidekick, but at the end of the day, when they try to balance the negative stereotypes that there's a legacy for in black superhero in the superhero genre, they try to deal with the racial elements. They usually kind of dismiss the sexual elements altogether. So in avoiding one set of stereotypes, they ignore representing black men in other capacities. So there's no love interest, there's no interaction with women outside of his engagement with Lois at a particular point in the film, but he did well. Mr. Terrific was fine as far as that's concerned. So I give them props on that. What else? So I thought his depiction was cool. I liked his technology. I liked his confidence. He was good. Guy Gardner was funny, which there's almost no other way to really do Guy, because he's such an asshole. You have to kind of make him funny, and he was. He delivered as far as that was concerned. So props to him. So he was cool. Let me see. What else did I like about it? I loved the Fortress of Solitude, which you could see in the in the trailer. I thought it was beautifully done. I mean, they kind of pulled from the classic Christopher Reeve Superman in terms of crystal technology. Not every Superman rendition deals with crystal technology. For the most part, I never saw crystal technology until the classic Christopher Reeve Superman. Before that, it had these 50s looking rockets and so on and so forth. But since that was introduced, most tried to reincorporate that, except for the Zack Snyder Superman. When you go back to Krypton, or you look at the technology that the Kryptonians had in Zack Snyder's Superman, there are no crystals. So you can kind of see Gunn taking us back to crystal technology for Kryptonians, and I like it. I actually prefer it, and I think that should be a standard, so I'm not mad about that. I thought the fortress was gorgeous, was well designed. The fact that it submerges in the ground and comes up out of it, I thought was brilliant. DNA technology as a means of access was cool. It was a lot smaller than other areas. I think the Christopher Reeve Superman kept the fortress kind of mysterious. In the Superman animated series, and in other series, it's usually pretty large. Hell, in some renditions, he has a damn zoo in there of alien creatures. So this one was pretty small. So I wonder if they'll kind of build on that later. They only showed us like one hallway in a room, really. But I still thought it was beautiful in that sense. I liked the robots, which, by the way, Michael Rooker played the I think it was robot number 1, which I thought was kind of interesting. So Gunn is bringing back some of his Guardians people. Of course, his brother had a bit scene in it, who was also in Guardians. Michael Rooker coming in from Guardians, so he still has love for his people, and he should, because they actually backed him. If to my memory, he wouldn't have done I think it was the third movie, had the actors not really stood behind him and demanded, because I think the MCU was going to replace him because of some allegations against him, and the actors demanded that he be the one to come back. So shout out to them, and I think he's paying them back with some respect. Bradley Cooper plays Jor-El, which we only get kind of a brief recording of him speaking, but still, that's a third Guardian brought back for Superman. So, I dig that. I dig that when those are, because I usually when I follow certain directors, when they have their team of people that they like to work with, like Spike Lee used to do and others, I like when they bring their team on different projects. I dig it. So it was kind of cool. So he brought back about 3 Guardians, but I like the Fortress. I like the robots. Their personalities were interesting to me. Usually you don't see live action Superman, movies with robots. That's usually in the comics and some of the animated series. So I'm glad they kind of did that. I liked Luthor's craziness. I liked his abuse, his strategic use of social media against Superman. I think that would be very real if you had a Superman of today, his manipulation of it. So I dig at least that part of it. And I thought the performance was pretty good as well, as far as Luthor is concerned. His name escapes me as well. But I have him up. I have the Superman thing on my screen, and his name is not where I thought it would be. Interesting. There it is. Nicholas Hoult. Yeah. Nicholas Hoult. I like Nicholas Hoult. He played, if I remember correctly, he played Beast in the X-Men series. He's done a lot of different stuff. But I dig him as an actor. I didn't think he would do well as Lex Luthor, but he did. But I liked him in Warm Bodies, X-Men, About a Boy when he was a kid. He was funny in that. I saw him in Nosferatu. He was cool. Renfield was actually pretty funny. I enjoyed him in that one. But I've seen him in a lot of different stuff. The Banker, a lot of people sleep on that movie. I show that in my class. That's Samuel L. Jackson. And it's a historical piece about 2 black men that bought up much of the real estate in LA and began to rent out to black folk. And so Nicholas Hoult plays the face of their company, whom they hired just to, kind of advance them. So he did well in that. So I dig Nicholas Hoult. I didn't think he'd do well as Lex Luthor, but he really did. He actually did. In my humble opinion, I thought he did a good job. He conveyed the contempt and the jealousy that Lex has for Superman, often without context, without sufficient reason. He played that well. He did. The diabolical aspect of Luthor, he played well. Going over the top and too far, especially in terms of his plans, that was played well. So that was all cool. Let me see what. Oh wow, that's who she was. Anyway, okay, so I'll get to her in a minute. Trying to think what else did I like. What else did I like? Jimmy Olsen was interesting. He's not always interesting, but he was in this particular film, so I appreciated his presence. You gotta have the Daily Planet, so that was okay. They didn't have a real, crazy technologically advanced universe. It was pretty set in the daily world, so to speak. So, that was okay. They definitely set the stage to open the DC universe up. I wanted them to go a little further, but they went as far as they went, and it was cool for what it was. I don't think it's as terrible as some of the people have been saying, most particularly those who are into the Snyder universe. I was okay with the Snyder universe. To me, it was all right. It wasn't something I was going to protest about when it went away. It just was what it was. This one, of course, goes with Gunn's philosophy. He's much more upbeat. He's much more into humor and laughter. That has its place. I don't think it always needs to be there as much as he seems to like it. But again, I think my son was right. He's really trying to pull in another generation of viewers for Superman. And I know writers of the comics always had problems with Superman because it's hard to write for him. He's without kryptonite, he's supposed to be undefeatable. And so, it can be difficult for people to write challenging stories for him. So I get that. So I get why he's doing what he's doing. I just know it's not for me. It's not targeted at me. He's really targeting a younger generation, and it showed. So being an older guy in the room, my son enjoyed some things. For me, let me see. I'm really trying to focus on the positives before I delve into, because, online we love to hear the things folks don't like about things, but I do want to at least give props because I am a Gunn fan, and I hope that the rest of the rollout for this improves. I mean, I really do want to see it continue to improve. It's no worse than the early MCU stuff as far as I'm concerned, so there's a lot of potential there. It just all kind of depends on consistency and where it's going to go. And this is why you hire a Kevin Feige or a James Gunn. You want somebody to maintain consistency. I think Kevin Feige has failed at that job in this last few years, but hopefully James Gunn will only improve. I mean, so I'm taking this as an introductory piece that's showing us the universe, his rendition of the DCU, and that it'll only improve from there. So I'm gonna tell you, I walked into this with hopes, and they weren't dashed. They were just kind of, okay, take this in stride and see where you go from it, with it, so for me, a lot of what happens later is a lot of, how well this whole thing will go depends on where he takes us next. It didn't fail to me. It wasn't a rousing success either. It was kind of mid, to me. It wasn't bad. It wasn't great, but it was cool. It was a popcorn movie. We enjoyed ourselves. Wasn't the best thing I'd ever seen. Wasn't the best Superman I'd ever seen. But, yeah. And I will say one of the things I did like about how they wrote him is they brought back the optimism. Superman fundamentally is an optimist. And I think, obviously with the Snyder rendition, you really don't get that. Now, he does try to redeem himself toward the end of the Justice League when he's fighting, and he's just before the first appearance of Darkseid, or at least the first time they see each other. He tries to bring in some positivity, but there's so much darkness, it's hard to do that. With Corn Sweat and with Gunn's rendition of Superman, he is overly optimistic, which I think in many respects Superman is supposed to be. He's supposed to represent that, and I think they actually returned that element to Clark, and I appreciated that. This Superman doesn't know as much about his Kryptonian legacy. He has certain elements of it. He has the technology, but all he has from his parents is a brief recording that gets cut off. So he doesn't really know much about his Kryptonian heritage, but he's optimistic, insanely so, which I think works. And they kind of contrast him with Lois, who is, kind of the Batman stand-in in this movie as far as negativity is concerned. And so I think that works out actually pretty well. I liked his upbeatness. I liked his positivity, and his take on things as far as that's concerned. But what Gunn does is he kind of makes everybody a teenage boy in some respects, or, a disapproving mother kind of thing. So, women are always, kind of smart and capable, but he doesn't have a problem with embracing silliness. So he uses that to temper that balance that we've seen in media for the last 30 years of stupid men, bumbling men, and super incredibly intelligent women. He kind of uses humor on both ends to soften that divide. But I do find a lot of his men tend to be bumbling idiots, which goes with his aesthetic. And, I'm hoping he kind of pulls away from that. And that's one of the reasons I like Superman, particularly Christopher Reeve's Superman, because he comes with an emotional maturity. Now, dealing with some of the critiques I had, I'll start with Superman himself. As I said, he's a big kid. He's emotionally immature, in my humble opinion. He's too, you've seen it in the trailer where he lets Lois interview him, and, he loses his temper. He's yelling, he's kind of yelling at her, and they almost break up after this conversation where she says, "I knew this wouldn't work." And I'll delve into Lois in a minute because I had some problems with that. Didn't have a problem with the actress. I think she was fine. I just never really liked Lois as a character. I've always found her annoying. She either takes him for granted, or as Patrice O'Neal used to say, she was just a regular chick. And I'm softening the language there. But there are renditions of her where she almost kind of tolerates being with Superman. And to me, what it tells the public is, if Superman is not good for, a woman, a regular woman, then who the fuck is? You know what I mean? So I have a problem with this kind of Lois that tolerates Superman. And I think there's an element of that in this film, but I'll get to that in a second. But as far as Superman's emotional maturity, what I liked about Christopher Reeve is he didn't let Lois fluster him. You know, when she would get on his nerves, she'd get annoying, or she would get combative on some levels. He stayed straight. He maintained his frame. This one doesn't do that. This one reacts like a teenage boy. He's yelling and screaming, and I didn't dig that as much. I went back and watched the classic Superman, the first movie, and when he first lets Lois interview him, he's in charge. He carries himself well, and he's not domineering, you know what I mean? And he's flirting with her. So the attraction is there, but his flirtation is much more of a hunter rather than a little boy. Now this movie is a little different. They're not just meeting for the first time. She already knows he's Superman. She acts like she doesn't in the office. So they're further along in their relationship, but you still get the impression that they're new. So we're not dealing with a Lois that can't see through the Clark's glasses and figure it out. We're not dealing with that. We're dealing with a couple who are together, but they're so early in their relationship that they're not sure if this is going to work. Most particularly Lois. I mean, again, Clark is an optimist, so he doesn't have any problem with the relationship. But as far as she's concerned, her version of Lois is not sure that any relationship will work. She's highly ambitious. She wants to write the groundbreaking articles, and she just doesn't know if a relationship would work. Now that's been fairly consistent. Lois has always been a go-getter, but the thing in the past with that though is that Superman was always the ultimate man, to the extent that a woman who didn't want a relationship wouldn't want to pass up the opportunity. My problem with this Lois is she's still indifferent. And I think where we are in society with gender relations, this idea that I've heard since the late 70s and 80s is that women tolerate men. Men are still failures. They're bumbling idiots. They don't know how to emotionally serve a woman's needs. Hell, in the 80s, it was popular for women to talk about how men didn't even sexually satisfy them. This kind of slight against men and their humanity, to me, I've always just found highly problematic. So to me, this idea of Lois who's damn near indifferent about being with him most of the film, I didn't like. Now, the latter half of the film, I really liked her because she stepped up. But in terms of the beginning point, I just didn't like her kind of approach to the relationship. Because I'm looking at it like, you're lucky to be with this guy, but you're treating him like he's just, you might dump him and just replace him with somebody else. And I'm just kind of like, this is ridiculous. So, I'm not a fan of Lois as a character, but this particular performance, especially in the second half of the film, I rather like. This Lois identifies as a punk rocker, and she kind of takes that punk philosophy and applies it to her journalism. She represents investigative journalism, which I don't think we've seen the likes of since the 1990s. So I like the return to investigative journalism, but whether or not how realistic that is these days, the film, in my humble opinion, didn't really address, but at least she represents that aesthetic. Let me see so I had problems with that Lois. I had problems with that. I mean, some of the Lex stuff was too over the top. The rumors about him having, monkeys typing as bots was true. I thought that was a little over top. And that's the kind of comic book shit I don't like. I don't like talking raccoons. I don't like typing monkeys. I don't like Detective Chimp. I don't like the stuff that just gets too silly to me. And that's the stuff that, ironically, James Gunn goes for first. I mean, he loves the C-level characters. I mean, the A and B characters he has to deal with. But if you leave it to him and his devices, he will deal with nothing but C-level characters if you let him. He loves that. He loves silliness. He loves C-level characters, and he loves to kind of go, into this humorous area. And I just think that those aren't always the best ways to go, especially with Superman. But there's nothing wrong with embracing the silliness. I mean, there's a long history, especially in the Silver Age, of silliness with Superman. So it's not that it isn't there. It's just, I don't particularly like that in general in my comics, let alone in Superman, but that's what he goes for. So you knew you were going to get it. But dealing with, for example, the Kents, the first half of the film, I thought they were just a little too bumpkin-ish. That's not really how I'm used to seeing the Kents. They're usually fairly dignified in a certain kind of way, and Gunn made them really, really common, maybe a little too much so. But there is a redeeming element, because you got to remember the Kents are what makes Superman Superman. Without that, you get Red Sun. Without that, you get Darkseid's the rendition of him when he was brainwashed and brought up by Darkseid in the animated series. You get a Superman that goes all over the place without the Kents. They are his compass, right? They supply him with his moral centeredness. So to me, both of them need to be represented a certain way. In this one, we don't really see the wisdom of Martha Kent, but we definitely do get to see one example of the wisdom of Jonathan Kent. And I like to see it. I was glad they put it in, because without that, I really didn't understand why they were in the movie. Because much of the time they were there, you didn't really get a sense of where he would get his values from until there's a particular conversation between Pa Kent and Clark, and that it redeemed the Kents to me. So I did appreciate that. Other than that, I thought that could have been stepped up a little bit. Of course, there's an Ultraman in this particular series. Now, Ultraman, it was strange that they used that, because Ultraman is actually, an evil Superman from a different universe. But they do go with the Lex creating a clone. Now, this has been a trope we've seen in the animated movies. We've seen it in the animated show. We've seen it in the comic books. So this is nothing new. But usually they go either Bizarro or Doomsday with Superman clones from Lex. This one, he didn't turn into anything else. He just wasn't very bright. And Lex had him like delivering donuts to people. I mean, it's really strange, but he wasn't very bright. He was low intelligence, but apparently he was supposed to be more powerful than Superman, and most of his moves had to be, most of the things he did in a fight, for example, had to be dictated to him by Lex himself. So they kind of went that route with the clone. There were rumors that it was going to be Henry Cavill that was going to be playing Ultraman. I thought that would have been a nice little nod to the old one, but I don't think Cavill was going to go for it. So, and I don't blame him. So, it ended up, just being Corn Sweat playing Ultraman. So, hey, it was what it was. The fight scenes were okay, although, the rumors are true. Superman is getting his ass kicked the entire movie. I'm not a fan of that. And I appreciate Christopher Reeve wasn't a fan of that either. He reminded you why he was Superman until, he was in something that appeared over his head. Then you were worried, and, he would kind of pull it out in the end. Now, the end was often Reeves outsmarting the situation, outsmarting the villains, outsmarting the situation itself. And I appreciated that. I didn't realize how cerebral Christopher Reeve Superman was in certain situations. He definitely had to think. How intelligent Corn Sweat Superman is still up for debate, in my humble opinion. He just kind of kept getting his ass kicked, and he does call for help at one situation, not really for himself, but to handle something that he's not physically able to be present to handle, which is some demonstration of intelligence. But he doesn't, I don't think he really outsmarted Lex, which is what comic book Superman and Reeves Superman would do. As much as he's touted for his physical prowess, he would turn around and outsmart people, and when folks least expected it. And I like that aspect of Superman. Gunn didn't really go that direction with this. So, but the fight scenes were vivid. The animation, or the CG was brilliant. You see some of the creatures that they're fighting look very reminiscent of what you saw in Guardians of the Galaxy. So those are always brightly colored and whatnot. So, there is that. And I think Gunn stays at the level we're used to seeing him stay when it comes to that kind of thing. So your eyes don't get bored. A lot of action, but I do feel a certain kind of way about Superman getting his ass whooped as often as he did. And they proclaimed at the very beginning of the movie that he was the most powerful metahuman. So to see him get beat that often, I understand why they did it. I think they worried that if you didn't get to see that, you wouldn't feel that he has any threats. But I think in doing so, you kind of underplay the power of Superman. You make him too common, where you almost kind of think of him like, why is he even needed? You don't, because obviously the threats are more than an average everyday human can handle, but it still kind of brings you to this point where it's too common. We need to be, we're just meeting this Superman. So, I kind of want to, get a sense of his prowess and whatnot. But, I did think he got his ass kicked a little too much for my taste. Let's see. So there was that. I'll go through the cast in a minute because I'm not remembering everything. I just jotted a few things down. This is kind of off the cuff. I don't really have as formal an outline as I usually do. Let's see. Let me see. There were moments that I didn't think was really Superman kind of moments. There were points where I would argue that tens of thousands of people died in this film. And the thing about it is, Superman is usually there in the nick of time. That's not the case in this universe. He's late. He comes to things after thousands of people have died, And there are points where you see buildings split in half that in real life would have people hanging on the outside of it and falling. I mean, we're talking 9/11 type of shit, and you don't see it. Now, I understand why you don't see it, because this would have been rated R in a quick minute. So most of the buildings are empty, but in broad daylight with no warning, realistically, that wouldn't happen. So there, some of the lead up toward the end of the film where you see the big fight take place in the middle of Metropolis, really tens of thousands of people likely died. And that's, to me, is not Superman. Superman, is going to prevent that much death and figure out a way beyond his brawn to, save everybody. And this one, tens of thousands of people are dying. He shows up late, and then he has to fight the main villains. And so a lot of his ability to save people is kind of curbed by these fights, and people continue to die. And to me, that's not Superman. That, he's not going to allow that. Now, my problem with Snyder's Superman in the first movie, Man of Steel, is he's damn near contributing to all the destruction. He's fighting Zod in the middle of the city, and I'm like, that has always frustrated me about these kind of movies, even Godzilla movies. I mean, people seem to enjoy seeing buildings knocked over and people stomped on, and I'm like, dude, this is, to me, the whole point is to preserve life. So, I didn't like that about Snyder's Superman. He's carrying this fight on in the middle of the city. Superman, and we see it with Christopher Reeve's Superman and Superman 2. He does the same thing. It's not as much destruction, which has more to do with film capacities of the 70s and 80s, I think, more than anything. But still, he carries this fight in the middle of the city, and there's a point in Superman 2 where he looks around and realizes this should not go down here, even though he started the fight with Zod and Nan and Ursa in the middle of the city, but he takes it to the North Pole or wherever they go. He figures it out. In this one, everything is happening, well, not everything, but most things are happening in the middle of the city. And, he tries to maintain some safety, but he doesn't really take the fights into non-populated areas the way I kind of hoped that a Superman would. But that is what it is. But I'm not used to seeing situations where in a Superman movie, even though they don't show the bodies falling, in real life, tens of thousands of people would have died. I'm not used to seeing that in a Superman movie. So that was kind of an issue for me. And I think he loses fights too often. I mean, to me, in this movie, especially when you're dealing with no-name characters, Superman should not be losing as easily as he does. Now, of course, he kicks it up in the end. But I just think, for me, if you're going to create last-minute characters that you kind of slap on screen, they should not be able to get as far with Superman as they seem to be able to do, or a few of them do. So I had some problems with that. But, it is what it is. But, I had a problem with, the Kryptonian family, Jor-El and Lara, his mother and father. Throughout the course of the film, as I said, there's a broken recording, and Superman has only gotten the first half of it, where it's, about their love for him as their son, so on and so forth. Supposedly Lex is able to, with the help of a lot of linguists, break down what the latter half of the message that Superman never hears was. And it was pretty much like Brightburn. It was pretty much, go dominate the earth, which is not Jor-El, and Laura. So he spends a portion of time lamenting over the fact that his parents sent him here to dominate the earth. And I'm like, that's not, And I thought they would say, okay, Lex Luthor fabricated this. But they don't. They actually say, no, it's true. Your parents did send you here. And this is coming from Mr. Terrific. So, somehow it's, ordained as true, even though nobody speaks Kryptonian, apparently. And so I thought that was just a little weird. But either way, I really didn't like that portrayal of Jor-El and Lara in that sense. I didn't dig that part of it. So they had this character, the engineer, who works for Lex, and she is, for all intents and purposes, Mercy. If you're familiar with the Superman animated series and the books, he had an assistant named Mercy, and often her arms would be bionic, would be technological. The implication was that she lost, and that she volunteered and had her arms removed, and Lex provided weapons that passed off and looked like regular arms, things of that nature. They don't call her Mercy in this. They call her the engineer. There doesn't seem to be a Mercy in the film. I don't know why you changed her name, but she's all nanotech. So it kind of confused me why she wasn't Mercy, but I wasn't disappointed. I just felt like, if you're going to create this new character that, and even if the engineer does come out of the comics, I'm not familiar with her. I don't think most people are. I just don't like, when new seemingly slapped together characters are able to get as far. She almost killed him. And I'm just like, yeah, come on. That should be reserved for a Doomsday. That should be reserved for a clone. That shouldn't be reserved for somebody you slapped together 5 minutes before you started filming. Gunn does bring back Eve, Miss Tessmacher. Even though I didn't know that's who she was most of the movie, and I actually didn't know it until I looked it up right now. She's hilarious in some respects. She has a thing for Jimmy Olsen that doesn't really make sense. He seems to be completely, really disgusted with her. And I get that she's annoying, but it doesn't make sense that a woman that hot would be after him the way she is, and that he would be as disgusted as he is the way he is. And and that's one of the things I can say Gunn doesn't do a lot of. He doesn't explain a lot. He doesn't. So there are a number of things that you walk out of the film kind of going, so what happened with that? And he just doesn't tell you. He doesn't tell you how it happened, how it started, and what the status of it is by the end of the film. And that applies to Miss Tessmacher and Jimmy Olsen, but it also applies to this pocket universe that Lex has created. And what the status of it is at the end of it. So there's just a lot of things kind of left open. Let me see. I'm trying to see if there's anybody. They did have a brother that worked for Lex, and his name, I didn't even know his last name in the film. His name is Otisburg, which if you go back to Superman 1 with Christopher Reeve, Otisburg was a city that Otis wanted created if Lex was able to destroy most of the West Coast and set up all the cities with his name in them. And so Otis handwrites Otisburg in there as a city, and it's so Gunn names the brother Otisburg. You hear Otis in the movie, but I didn't know that was his last name, so that's kind of funny. I like that he included some references for those of us who've been around for a while, some comic book heads. He pulls from different stories, classic Superman stories here and there, but he's not heavy-handed with it. It's just real light. But I appreciate the nod. I do that in my comic book movies. I need to have a nod. I need you to appreciate the people who've been around. And if you're going to cater to a new generation, fine. Just give a nod to the older cats who've been around and who are still coming around. So I appreciate that. They do a race swap with Perry White, played by Wendell Pierce. I like Pierce as an actor. I mean, it's not a major shift to me. It's probably something that would upset whites more than me, the white guys who really don't like race swaps. But I'll admit, I'm not a fan of race swaps either, in general. I mean, for me, just give me black characters that have substance, and I'm good with that. I don't necessarily need to see white characters swap. But I do understand that because the legacy of comics has been so white for so long, that if you do a movie and you try to, bring in some people of color, there's not a lot of room for them to exist because there's so many white people. And this is something that I don't hear my racist counterparts talk about, but of course they have different motivations as far as challenging race swapping. But, at no point do they want to admit that there are too many white characters because that's the legacy of the comics. But here's the thing. black men were fighting this legacy since the 40s. So we're not coming to this in the last 5 years demanding for space in a genre that we were never a part of. Black men were fighting to have their own independent books published, even though, you had whites shutting down access to distribution companies. I mean, there's a long legacy that I've written about in a particular blog I did when I was reviewing the Black Panther. You can find it online, and it's on my blog, newblackmasculinities.wordpress.com. It's the only one in there where I actually review the Black Panther film. I think it was the first one when it came out. And I talked about the legacy of black men who have been fighting since the 40s to be present in three-dimensional ways, not just as sidekicks and one-dimensional characters. And so because black men have fought that fight for so long, I do believe that, we have a space in this genre that needs to be respected. Should it be as Perry White? I'm a little indifferent, but three-dimensional black male characters especially, hell yeah. Which is why I appreciate the way Mr. Terrific is represented, and I appreciate the nod to him. I do. I appreciate the nod to Mr. Terrific and having him in the film. We just usually have that missing sexual component that rounds us out as three-dimensional beings, because I really don't think that, folks are comfortable representing black male sexuality, even most particularly heterosexual black male sexuality. I don't think they want to delve in that territory. And I'm all for movies that we do. That's why I am hoping that Ryan Coogler will do the next Panther movie. Not Panther Blade movie. I'm hoping he does do the next Blade movie. Because I don't find that white filmmakers really get black masculinity like that. So let me see. Who else in this? Should I talk about? So Rick Flag Sr. is played by Frank Grillo. He plays in Creature Commandos. He does well enough, but he only has a bit part. He's only there a couple times, but I do like Frank Grillo as an actor, so I was glad to see him there. And they're kind of connecting different projects. So he's already popped up as an animated character in Creature Commandos. They bring him in, visually in the live action film. So I think Gunn connecting his universe together is starting out pretty well as far as that's concerned. And so his use of Frank kind of shows you that he's trying to stay consistent, which I appreciate. So let me see. Guy Gardner, as I said, it was funny. Hawk Girl, it was kind of weird. I don't have a sense if she comes from Thanagar or what. She just kind of, I don't know. She looks like a Latina chick that just flies around screaming at people. But they don't give us a lot of information about her. There's just some light banter back and forth with her and, some of her group members in the Justice Gang, as they call it. So you can still see they're in an early unrefined kind of state, which leaves them room to figure some things out. So I get it. I'm trying to see if there are any other characters that I want to call out. They did have a quick reference to Maxwell Lord, who's played by James Gunn's brother. So I think, maybe they'll go somewhere with that, particularly in regard to bringing in Wonder Woman. In the comics that, she actually kills him. So we'll see if, how far they do that. But he's setting up his universe. And I guess overall what I would say is it's an okay beginning. I'm not thoroughly disappointed or anything of that nature. There are some things I would like differently, but I think they're mostly generational. I mean, you can't grow up watching Christopher Reeve and just watch this and not have some thoughts. I tend to like a more mature, strategic, intelligent Superman. This one is more, like I said, Gunn likes teenage boy mentality when it comes to his character. So I think you still get that. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily my cup of tea, but I don't think it's worth dismissing the whole project over. It's just a matter of really seeing what his universe looks like as he continues to flesh it out. My only issue is he tends to like the C characters more than the A characters. And for me, somebody who prefers the A characters, I'm concerned about what that means later. So we'll see. But I appreciate y'all checking this out, and I look forward to hearing your comments. All right, peace.